part of the purpose of Acts is that we see how God is working after Jesus died and rose again, and how the Holy Spirit has been moving throughout the new church, and particularly in the last several chapters through the life of a guy named Paul. We call him the Apostle Paul. God has used him for writing Romans, Galatians, Ephesians, Colossians, Philippians, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Titus, Timothy, 1st and 2nd Timothy. A lot of the Bible in the New Testament was written by this guy, this man that God has used. Now today, I'm going to use, what a metaphor is? I'm going to tell you what I think a metaphor is. And if I get it wrong, you can correct me later. But it's like a word picture. Okay, it's like a word picture, a descriptive word picture. One of the word pictures that we commonly use is things that describe a journey. We say like life is a journey. We've said those words, And we use illustrations to talk about our journey. We may say, it was rough going. It was a rough road. A lot of bumps in our road. That's descriptive of our journey through life. And we're not talking about being on a rough road. We're talking about things are hard. We're going to see today a sailing story. And I don't know anything about sailing. I don't know anything about boats. But one thing I do know is that I think this is true. In a sailboat like they had back in their day, there were no motors. There was a rudder, but there was no motors. And so basically wherever the wind blew you, that's kind of where you went. And I think you can, in some sailing ships, you can kind of do things even if you're against the wind, but it's kind of hard, okay? And so we talk about sailing things. We say, it was rough seas. It was, it was smooth sailing. We just use those words to describe it. Or we get to the other side. Things will be better when we get to the other side. That's even a Bible. We've heard in some of the hymns saying, when I cross the other shore, I'll get to heaven. So all of these metaphors, these descriptions, we're going to kind of incorporate as we go through this. And I'm going to pull out some illustrations that think about your life and my life that kind of correspond to Paul's journey. Now, we left off, okay, he's been in a bunch of trials. Paul's arrested. He's been arrested for more than 2 years. He's been tried by the Sanhedrin, the Jewish leaders. They want to kill him. He's been tried by a Roman commander who rescued him from the Sanhedrin, and he didn't know what to charge him, so he sent him off to the governor to find out what's the deal. And the first governor didn't do anything, just kept him in prison for 2 years. He got succeeded. The next governor came along. He didn't do anything. He couldn't make a decision, and so Paul said, well, send me to Rome then, if you can't make a decision. Then he gets judged by the king. King Agrippa shows up, and the king says, well, we could let this guy go, because there's really there's nothing on him. So that's where we left off. So now Paul is going to begin his journey to Rome, where he will eventually stand before Caesar himself to give his case and have Caesar's judgment. And we know that in the end, he's going to be killed. Okay? But God, all along the way, has said, Paul, you must go to Rome. I'm going to take care of you. You're going to get to Rome. And he says, because you have to give your testimony before Rome. And if you know Paul, if you follow him, everywhere he goes, he just talks about Jesus. Whether it's in front of a governor, whether it's in front of the Sanhedrin, whether it's in front of the king, whether it's just from the church or the Jews or the Gentiles, or wherever he is, he testifies about the Lord. So let's pick up the story. Acts chapter 27, beginning in verse 1. And so I want you to, as we go through this, put your movie mind on, okay? So you can envision what's happening, because there's a lot of detail in this story. Verse 27, or chapter 27, verse 1. When it was decided that we would sail for Italy, Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. Now, to set the movie right, notice what it says. It says, when it was decided that we would sail for Italy. Who's the we? We've been talking about Paul. Well, it turns out that the we is Luke. Luke is Paul's friend. Luke is the man who actually wrote the book of Acts. He wrote the story. He wrote Luke in the Bible, one of the Gospels, but he also wrote the Acts because he's been following Paul. So we, meaning Paul and Luke, get on this ship. And then it says, and other prisoners. Okay, so there's more prisoners heading for Rome, but Paul's been singled out. We're handed over to a centurion named Julius. Now, it's interesting that every time the New Testament refers to a centurion, it's always in a good light. Every centurion that we're ever introduced to, these are like commanders of 100. Okay, a century, 100. These are commanders of 100. And they are the backbone of the Roman army. And they were particularly men of honest trade and of some integrity, because everyone we find in the New Testament, you remember the centurion came to Jesus, or sent the soldiers to Jesus and said, my daughter is dying, can you help me? And Jesus says, okay, I'll go. And the servant said, no, you don't have to go. My master said that, listen, if you just say the word, I know it'll happen, because he says, I know that if I say the word, it'll happen. And remember Jesus said, you know what? I haven't found anyone with such great faith. That was a centurion. At the cross, the centurion was standing there when Jesus was, and when Jesus died, he said, truly, this must have been the Son of God. Peter met a centurion, the first Gentile that we have recorded that was saved. God gave a vision. It says that he was a man who honored God. He gave alms. He helped the Jews. He was a good God-honoring who prayed regularly. And when Peter came, he became a believer. So the centurions are always showed in a good light. And even here, Julius, so we're going to see this man. God's going to use Julius. So we got Julius, Luke, Paul, a whole bunch of other prisoners. Okay, verse 2, we boarded a ship for Andrometrium, about to sail for ports along the coast. Now, if you have one of these things in your bulletin, flip it over, because there's a map on the other side. And you want to look at the blue line, okay? The blue line is the story that we are going to read. And you'll notice there where they start, okay? So they're starting there, it looks like Tyre. Well, actually, no, it's down in Caesarea. And that's where Paul was imprisoned. They're going to get on a ship, and we're going to follow them as they go, okay? So it says that we were heading for ports along the coast. So this is a merchant ship. This is one that's going to go from city to city. They're going to kind of follow the coast along on their way eventually to Italy. All right? So it says, we boarded a ship from Andrometrium, about to sail for ports along the coast of the province of Asia. And we put out to sea. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was with us. So here's another person that's added on. Aristarchus, we've met him before. We met him back in I think it's Philippi or Thessalonica, when he was saved and he joined Paul and became part of Paul's group of men that were going through all of Asia and preaching the gospel. And it says he's from Macedonia. You will find, and he's going to go with Paul all the way to Rome, and you'll find him in the Bible at the end of several letters. Paul says, and greet one another. I greet you, and Aristarchus greets you, because he's going to stay with Paul this whole time. And so he's also on this ship headed for Italy. Now you can follow your map. It says the next day we landed in Sidon. So see, if you can go up to Sidon there, you can see where they are. And Julius, the centurion, in kindness to Paul, allowed him to go to his friends so they might provide his needs. That's kind of strange. That's pretty special treatment. Now remember, Paul was a Roman citizen, and Paul was not charged with anything. Right? He's not a convicted man. He's on his way to Rome to present his case because he's never been charged. And so I'm sure that Festus gave instructions to make sure that you treat this guy pretty good, you know. And so this centurion allows Paul to leave the ship and to go and visit his friends. That's pretty kind. See, God is providing and taking care. On Paul's journey through life, this is part of Paul's life, right? It's just part of his life. And God is taking care of him day by day by day, okay? He got him on the ship. He's not dead. How many people have tried to kill him? Lots of people, lots of cities, lots of group of people have tried to kill Paul, but God has protected him all along the way. And even he provides his provision. Remember, God's provision. It's not a miracle, but God has orchestrated things around us, all around us, so that his will be done. And even in Paul's case, he put the right centurion in charge. And by the way, the centurion is in charge of the ship. You're going to find out. You know, it's not the captain, it's the centurion. The Roman, centurions trump civilian captains, okay? And so he shows kindness to Paul. Let's continue the story. Verse 4, from there we put out to sea again, and we passed to the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. So I'm not a sailor. I don't even know what the word lee means. So I looked it up. You know what it means? It means the opposite side of a boat that the wind's blowing from. So if your wind's blowing over here on this side of the boat, the lee side is the opposite side. So it says they passed to the lee of Cyprus. What would that mean? That would mean they were on the side of Cyprus, opposite of where the wind was blowing. Now, this is the fall time, as we're going to see, and the seas are getting more dangerous. Okay, you don't want to go sailing in the wintertime on the Mediterranean Sea because it's unpredictable. They don't have motors. You just get blown around, so they're very careful. So the winds are starting to kick up now, and so they sail on the lee side of Cyprus. Okay, so they're on their way. If you could follow the map there, you can see them come up north there, kind of between Cyprus and Asia there. Okay, because the winds were against us. Verse 5, when we had sailed across the open sea off the coast of Sicilia, so you can see on the map, you'll see the words like Sicilia and Pamphylia, so they're just a little south of that, but they're in the we landed at Myra in Lycia, so you can see where they land over there. So they've kind of gone all the way across there, and says they went out in the open sea, so they've kind of safely navigated across there to the sort of the end of Asia. Now they're going to kind of head for, the big sea going across over to Italy. It says when they got there, though, verse 6, there the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy and put us on board, right? So he found they changed ships. He found one heading for Italy. Now Alexandria comes from, I think it's Egypt. I think. And so it's going to be a grain ship. Okay? And it's, Rome, a lot of people live in Rome. There's not enough farming, so they're importing grain. And so here's a grain ship headed for there. And we know a little bit about these ships. If found out a little bit. They're about 140 feet long. They're 36 to 50 feet wide and about 35 feet deep. They're just sturdy cargo vessels. And they got one square sail and one little tiny sail in the front. There is no rudder. They have two big oars. That's how they steer the ship. Okay, so they're sturdy cargo ships, but they're not good for sailing in storms, okay, because they just don't maneuver. All right, that's kind of important to know here as we go. So they get on this ship, headed for Italy. Verse 7. Now watch these words. It says, we made slow headway for many days. And they're headed for Italy. They're headed for Italy, and the winds are coming up, and it's like we're not getting anywhere for many days, and had difficulty arriving off of Cnidus. Okay, so you can look there. They went down just a little bit. Okay, they kind of started going east, or west, but they kind of had to turn and go south down to Cnidus. They were headed for Italy, when the wind did not allow us to hold our course. See, they're not heading for Italy anymore. It says, so we sailed to the lee of Crete. So you can see which way the wind's blowing, right? Because the lee is the opposite side of the wind side. So they had to go down south there. You can see them, and it says, we sailed to the, I lost my place here. We sailed to the lee of Crete, opposite of Salmon, so you can kind of see where they went, past that island. We moved along the coast with difficulty and came to a place called Fair Havens near the town of Lasea. So they get to port. It wasn't where they were headed. They were going to go all the way to Italy. But the wind just came up and they said, we got to go south, man. And so they go south and they go, man, let's just hide on the other side of Crete. Let's see if we can find a port. So they kind of come around the south end and they see Fair Havens and they pull in. Okay, because it's rough sailing. You just don't go against the wind very well in one of these ships. Okay, so they get to Fair Havens. Now it says, much time had been lost. Okay, already they're having trouble. They wanted to get to Italy. They actually wanted to get to Italy before wintertime. I mean, quick sail across there. Let's get in before the whole sea goes baloney. We can't go anywhere, because the deal was you do not sail. So this is like October. Okay, October, November. We're going to see it's actually going to name, it was after the Day of Atonement, which that year was October 5th. So it's kind of like right now for us, okay? It's pretty much just about the same time. We're a couple of weeks farther. But basically after November 15th, you don't go sailing on the Mediterranean. Not if you want to live, all right? So they sneak into Fair Havens. Much time, verse 9, much time had been lost sailing already because of danger, because it was dangerous, and because by now it was after the Day of Atonement. So there it is, it's after October 5th, okay? So Paul warned them. Now, that's interesting. Paul warned them. We're going to see here that the captain of the ship gets warned by Paul. Who's Paul? Some preacher? You're gonna tell us how to go sailing? Well, now you got to remember, Paul has put about 3,500 miles on the sea so far. In fact, if you will go to 2 Corinthians, and I'll read it if you don't want to go there, chapter 11 and verse 25, listen to Paul as part of his testimony. He says, 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked and spent a night and a day in the open sea. He wrote this before this trip. He's been on a boat. He's been on at least 3 of them that have gone down. He's floated on the sea for a night and a day. He's been there. He's done that. He goes, fellas, I'm kind of looking at the weather here. This isn't looking good. I'm telling you, this is not a good plan. We need to stay right here. Men, I can see, verse 10, that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to the ship and cargo and to our own lives also. Verse 11, but the centurion, the boss even over the ship, instead of listening to what Paul said, who's going to listen to a preacher, followed the advice of the pilot and the owner of the ship. Now, the owner's got a whole bunch of grain. He says, look, I got to get paid. I'm not getting paid if we don't get there. And the pilot is thinking, well, yeah, we can do this. I've been on the ocean before. Paul's going, guys, I'm telling you, it ain't going to work. We're going to lose this ship. You go out there, we might even lose our lives. But he gets overruled. Verse 12, since the harbor was unsuitable for winter in, now he's in Fair Havens. Now, you know what that means? It's a dinky little harbor. And we're not going to put our whole crew here for the winter. We need a bigger city. We need a better place. We're not going to stay in this little place. No, we're not going to do that. And so it says, the majority decided. They all got together and said, nah, we should sail out. Let's get out of here. Hoping to reach Phoenix. Now look where Phoenix is. So it's on Crete. Okay, it's just kind of around the corner. It's not that far away. Hey, we can just kind of slip along the bottom of Crete here and make a little turn up on the west and get around this little knoll, and we'll be right there. It's not that far. We can do this. That's where we'll winter. That's where we're going to reach Phoenix and winter there. This was a harbor in Crete facing both southwest and northwest. So it's actually a better harbor. So Paul gets overruled. Verse 13. When a gentle south wind began to blow. So just think, it's south. Okay, they're kind of south. So the wind's going to blow them up and get them back on course. They can kind of maybe kitty corner across the ocean there. And south is going to get around the corner there, and it'll blow them straight up to Phoenix. It'll be smooth sailing, and it's a nice gentle breeze. It's a nice day in October. A good day. Like we have them, right? We had some great days. We actually got warm in October. Thinking, man, this feels like summertime. This is great. And then it snowed. Well, it's in November. And, it's kind of like that because you think about it. The last Sunday, we all came to church and we're thinking, okay, it's just a rainy day, No big deal. It's a little cool, but... And by the time we got out of church, there's big old honking flakes coming down. And it snowed all day long. Who expected that? Nobody. So they saw their opportunity. So they weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete. Before very long, a wind of hurricane force called the northeaster, some of your Bibles may have an older name for it, but it means northeaster, swept down from the island. So now it's coming the opposite direction. Some wind, gentle winds going south. Now we get the northeaster just pounding down, and it says it's a hurricane force. Not tropical storm. Hurricane force. Uh-oh. The ship was caught by the storm and could not head into the wind. So we gave way to it. I said, guys, we can't go that way, so we got no motor. We can't steer. Let's let it blow us. So it turns them around, and now they're heading south, opposite of Italy, opposite where they were, headed out into the deep ocean. Stop for a second here. Okay? Metaphor. Our life is like a journey. Okay? It is. And so we make our plans in our lives, and we say, well, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. And, and God's with Paul, right? And Paul's going along. He kind of sees danger, but he's overruled, right? And he's not the captain of the ship or the centurion, so he can't. But he's going, and what looks like a good thing, all of a sudden, and it's not his fault, boom, here comes a hurricane. Stuff like that can happen to us too, right? I mean, just like everything was seemingly going okay. It was, he's on his ship, and it's not the best thing, but he's at least doing what the Lord wants. And then all of a sudden, whammo, a hurricane. And he's got no control. He says, we can't go where we wanted to go. We're going to give up. I can't fight the wind. And so the boat gets flipped around, heads the other direction, and the storm is on. Wow. Sometimes that happens. Even to Christians. The storm is on. What are you going to do? Well, you can't fight. He couldn't fight the wind. So you just have to take it. Right? You just have to take it. Verse 15, the ship was caught by the storm and could not head into the wind. So we gave way to it and were driven along. As we passed the lee, so you can go back there to your map. So the lee side would be the protected side of Cauda. We, notice that word there. At this sentence, listen to the sentence. We were hardly able to make the lifeboat secure. All the sailors are fighting the storm, and they look at these prisoners, they look at Paul, they look at Luke, they look at Ursula, and says, guys, get that boat in, because they used to tow the lifeboat behind them. And it was like a drag, and if the thing went down, it's going to make it worse. And they said, get that lifeboat in. And so we were pulling on a thing and pulling on a thing and pulling on a thing. And that's what it says. Verse 17, we couldn't do it. So the men hoisted it aboard. Everyone helped out. Then they passed ropes under the ship itself to hold it together. This is a big storm. I mean, it's a wooden boat, so somehow they get the cables and they tie it together. They may even gone around the whole thing, that was one of the practices. But they're going to hold this thing together because this is a big storm. Because they were afraid they would run aground on the sandbars of Syrtis. You know where that is? Look on your map. You see way down there where it says Cyrene? They're headed for, I guess it's Egypt, Syria, or whatever country that is. And they were known to have sandbars. They're completely at the mercy of the storm. You know what? Sometimes you and I are completely at the mercy of circumstances. We have no control. We can't stop even if we wanted to. It's just happening. But I want you to notice this, that God was still with Paul. And Paul was on the boat. It was happening to him too. Yet God had said, I'm going to get you to Rome, Paul. You've got to go. And so even though circumstances happen and things beyond our control, his control, it's not beyond God. But it's rough. It's really rough. Listen to this, okay? So they were afraid they were going to run ground on the sandbars, so they lowered the sea anchor and they let the ship be driven along. Verse 18. We took such a violent battering from the storm that the next day they began to throw the cargo overboard. I mean, they're afraid these waves are going to go over, so they got to lighten the ship a little bit, so they start throwing off some of the stuff, some of the grain. I don't know, maybe it was in bags, or maybe they had to carry it up in bushels. I don't know what they did, but they began to unload some of the grain. I mean, this is how desperate it is. This is a big storm. It's a big, it's not a 1-dayer. It's not a 2-dayer. It's not a 3-dayer or a 4-dayer or a 5-dayer or a 6-dayer. They're out there for a long time. And they began to throw the cargo over. On the third day, so we're up to 3 now, on the third day they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. Now these are experienced sailors. They've been out on the ocean before. They said, we can make it. Sure, we can make it. And they're realizing, oh, this is bigger than us. When neither the sun nor the stars appeared for many days, and the storm continuing raging, we, notice that word, we, so who's we? It includes Luke, Paul, Aristarchus, and everybody. It says, we finally gave up all hope of being saved. We're going to find out here in a second. They were 2 weeks in the storm. And you can't navigate. They navigated by the sun and by the stars. There was no radars. There was no GPS. None of that stuff. So here you are. You're in a storm on the middle of the ocean. No land. No control. You don't even know where you are. You just kind of think, well, if we go far enough, we're going to hit the sandbars. We're going to be sunk in the middle of the ocean, destroyed. And for 2 weeks, we'll find out, many days. How would you feel if you were on a boat like that? The motor's gone. You can't use your sails. And you're at the mercy of the ocean. I've been out on the ocean once, but never beyond the sight of land. It would scare the bejeebies out of me. Serious. And I'd be glad the day that we got back. Like that day, let's go back home. But no. Can you imagine being out there day after day, and all it is a storm? It's a hurricane. And you're out there, and there's no hope. It says, we gave up all hope of ever being saved. That's pretty desperate. Thinking, all I got left to do is just wait till the boat crashes or sinks. That's my only hope. Just get it over with. We're not going to be rescued, ever. After they had gone a long time without food. Now, I don't know, it can't be because they don't have food, because there is some food. Maybe they just were so sick, fighting the storm, that who wants to eat? You eat, you probably just pitch it up again. I don't know. So after they've been out there, verse 21, Paul stood up before them and said, and he just throws this in. Men, you should have listened to me. You should have taken my advice not to sail from Crete. Then you would have spared yourselves this damage and loss. He goes, I told you so, guys. Who's this preacher guy? They're out there sick. They're in the middle of the storm. It's been days, and he stands up and says, well, guys, I told you so. You shouldn't have done it. Shut up. We're going to throw you overboard. It's just... But he has a word to them. He's going to encourage them. He says, verse 22, but now I urge you to keep up your courage, because not one of you will be lost. Only the ship will be destroyed. Why is he going to say it? Look at verse 23. Last night, an angel of the God to whom I belong. Listen to these words of Paul's. Make them now applicable to you. Last night, an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me. God was there in the storm, right with Paul. And he says, the God whom I belong to him. I belong to him. I'm his. And I serve him. And he came to me, and he stood next to me, and he told me these things. He said, verse 24, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand trial before Caesar. Okay, he says, you're going, Paul. I've told you this before. I'm telling you again. You're going to be there. And God has graciously given you the lives of all who sail with you. He didn't say, I'm going to give them the boat. He said, but I'll give you the lives of everybody with you. So Paul stands up. He says, guys, I told you so, but hang in there, because God appeared to me and he says, you're going to be safe. The boat's going to be lost, but you're going to be safe. Verse 25, so keep up your courage, men. Don't give up. And listen to what he says here. For I have faith in God that it will happen just as he told me. He said, we could say, well, I read it. And I have faith in what God said, that I'm his, I serve him. And as you read those promises in the Word of God, he'll never leave you, never forsake you. Or whatever the promise is that applies to your storm, put your faith in those words. He says, I have faith in God. It's going to be exactly like he said. Verse 26, nevertheless, we must run aground on some island. He says, we're going to crash. Nevertheless, we're going to crash. We're not going to finish this chapter. Let's see how we can get maybe a... no. We're going to stop. I'll spoil the story. Okay, we're going to stop here. So you get out early. Metaphors, okay? We're not on the ocean right now, but we are, in a sense, on our journey. And some days are smooth sailing. Some days it's cloudy. See, I'm using metaphors again. Some days it's rainy. Some days it's snowy. Some days it's just beautiful and balmy. And that's how life is. Okay? It's not all the same. And that's for Christian or non-Christian. You can be a Christian and still have rainy days and stormy days and good days. But know this, just like Paul knew, God is always with you. You belong to him. You serve him. And you and I need to have faith in what he said that is actually true. He'll never forsake you, never leave you, even to the ends of the earth, because you belong to him. Let's pray. Lord, this story is a true story about a real storm. And we experience real storm-like conditions too sometimes. And Lord, whether we're in a balmy time right now, or a rainy time, or cloudy, or foggy, or snowy, or in a hurricane, as some people have even been in recently, we still belong to you. And I pray that we will always have faith in you. And I pray that we will be assured that you stand with us. Whatever happens, you stand with us. You're sovereign, Lord. And we put our trust in you. In Jesus' name, amen. Go with the Lord, and he will go with you.